Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they'll just like
I
kind
guess
of.
we can toggle back and forth between, because comments, yeah, there are 4 comments here.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a like. Whoops.
No, those are
Oh,
likes.
there's, okay.
It looks like there's just one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how do I zoom out? Oh.
I think if we just move it back more, and then like we can kind
We'll
of.
just sit cozily together.
We'll just sit cozily together. And let's see what we've got in here. Welcome. Okay. Sandra Rubio says hi. Hi, Sandra.
Hello. So, we're live. So this is YouTube here.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's YouTube here.
And Josef, you have to get a little more in mine.
Yeah.
So we're here to do an AMA to connect with all of you. It's so nice to have this time together in person with Josef on this nice hot day. I'll be drenched in sweat in the next minute. If you can, yeah, let's see. I'm still not seeing any comments. Oh, here's a second comment. Does that?
No.
So strange.
Yeah, this is like. Oh, wait, no,
hey,
we've got.
Danny.
Yeah, we've got some.
Hi, Sam. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll just toggle back and forth, I guess, between.
Okay.
Why don't we start? Why don't we see? Let's see. Should we start with your YouTube?
Yeah, we just have people saying really nice things, but you know, if you have any questions for myself or Laura, we're happy to have a go at them. Yeah.
So.
Says, hi Laura, what would you do differently if you had been in the same situation?
Same situation. Would you share a little bit more about which situation you mean? And I saw someone above was commenting about how learning about all of the issues you talk about on your channel can cause anxiety. And
Yeah.
someone above said they needed to take a break. And it's not you didn't ask a question, but I think it's a really important point that getting informed about all these issues that Josef talks about, that I talk about, inevitably means having to face a lot of painful emotion, because you realize there's so much you didn't know, you know, at the outset of your relationship to these drugs that now you know. You might feel regret, shame, anger, betrayal, grief, sadness, anxiety. And I think just listening to yourself, and it sounds like this person is, you know, if you need a break from it, if you need to step away and just disconnect from the information, there's wisdom in that. But I think inevitably also recognizing that it's meant to hurt.
Yeah.
You know, it's inevitably going to hurt. And yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the big problems these days is that we don't tell people the truth about the medications and the problems. You know, we tend to cheerlead people onto meds from the purpose of, you know, we don't want to stigmatize people is what we say, but we end up not being truthful about it. And the truth is that there are a lot of things to be worried about with the medications, and sometimes it can feel like a fire hose when you're learning about it for the first time. And so, yeah, taking a step back is totally okay. Laura, I got a comment over here on X for you. It says, Laura, great to see you there. I'd like to know what you would say to people who say they're bipolar and don't need meds, but what you would say to people who say they're bipolar and don't like the meds, but they say they have no other option.
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I would start by getting curious with that person and saying, what do you mean by no other option? What is leading you to think you have no other option? And my hunch is that there are probably a lot of people out there who would say, oh, well, because every time I try to get off my meds, I have a relapse or things fall apart. And So I end up having to go back on them, and I've just kind of resigned myself to needing them. In which case you can then, bring up the topic of, well, what if it's not a relapse? What if it's actually withdrawal? Because that then opens up the possibility for that person that it might actually look different if they come off their meds in a slower way, and it might not actually be inevitable that they need to stay on them. So I think just being curious, asking questions about where they're getting that idea from, and then gently inviting them to step back and think differently. Especially if their answer is, oh, because every time I try not to take them, I feel horrible. Because I think that's the reason why so many people stay on these drugs long term, is that they don't realize they're dependent on them. And in withdrawal, when they try to stop them, they think they're having a relapse. They think it's just their baseline condition. And that's why they end up feeling resigned to a life on meds.
Yeah. Let's see what we got here. What would be an ideal tapering schedule for someone who's been taking lithium for under 2 years? I'm currently on a keto diet for bipolar 2. And so I guess what I would recommend for that is, if you're doing the keto diet and you're stable and you're not having, a lot of mood swings, you can do a taper of lithium. If you're in the US, lithium comes in a liquid formulation that's quite easy to taper. As for like a schedule, like mapping it out, I don't typically recommend that. What I would recommend is that you start with like a 5 to 10% reduction, and then just gauge how you do with that reduction. And then every 2 to 4 weeks, you can do another reduction. And if you're doing really well, you can speed it up. But if you start to have lithium withdrawal symptoms, which generally tends to be things like irritability, increased sleep issues, increased anxiety, then you just slow the rate down. But I've seen people come off in like 6 to 9 months. I've seen some people take, 18 months, sometimes even longer. There's no set schedule. You just have to listen to your body, and your body will tell you the pace. Okay. I guess do you know what this one is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we got a question. What would you do if you had a child with the situation you went through when you were 14? You might have to give a bit of context for people who may not know your backstory.
Sure. So when I was 13, I had this profoundly terrifying, basically breakdown, and ended up, just spinning out, acting out at home in anger and outbursts, and I was cutting myself, I was screaming and cursing, and I was just terribly despairing, and life felt meaningless, and I felt like I didn't fit in, and eventually my parents, not knowing what else to do, took me to a therapist, and then the therapist took me to a psychiatrist, and that's what began my journey with the bipolar diagnosis and all the meds. And so I think if I was in a situation where I had a pubescent, a kid age 12, 13, 14 who is breaking down in a similar way as I was, I would first just really check in with myself and how I was feeling about the emotions that my kid is, or the behaviors that my kid is expressing. Am I feeling afraid of this? Am I feeling irritated by this? Am I feeling confused by this? Because as parents, it's up to us to really center ourselves and have a good sense of ourselves and the emotional states that we're in, because inevitably the emotional states that you're in will shape how you engage with your kids. So I would start there. And then from there, I think being curious, like I said in the other question too, just approaching your kid with true openness and curiosity and humility about what it is they're struggling with, and keeping in your mind that this is not about something being wrong with your kid. This is about your kid's relationship to life around him or her, and there's a meaningful reason or meaningful reasons why your kid is struggling in this way. And if you can stay curious, tolerate all the uncertainty and the pain and the frustration, and just focus on maintaining the connection with your kid so that your kid feels seen and heard and understood. I think from there, things just unfold, and you as a parent with your instincts, which are so important to maintain. You know, unfortunately, for all their good intentions, mental health professionals often teach parents to distrust their own instincts. We're the experts. You're just a parent. You don't have degrees after your name. We know your kid better than, you know, we know the situation better than you do. Don't let anyone lead you to distrust your instincts as a parent. No one knows your child better than you. And so as long as you're connected to your instincts, connected to your kid, staying open and curious and just courageous, where you're meant to go from here will unfold itself before you. And I think just remembering that there's nothing actually wrong with your kid. It's about your kid's relationship to life.
Yeah. And I often find doctors can be really, really quick to be like, oh, you know, there's a biological problem with the child, when they could be dealing with relationship issues or loneliness or academic pressures or you know, just kind of finding themselves. And I don't really feel like a lot of doctors take the time to really go into those issues. And so really focusing on like root cause, like what is actually going on with my child? What is the support that they need would be, I mean, it's just essential.
Yeah. This is the second you medicalize your understanding of your child and you see them through this lens of, oh, they are having symptoms of a condition, you're cutting off all the other possible frameworks and understandings and contexts, like you said, school, friendships, bullying, diet, sleep, screen time. I mean, the list could go on and on. But when you're viewing your kid as having symptoms of an illness, none of that really matters, because this is just about treating the illness versus looking at your child in the context of his or her full life.
Yeah. I got another one for you, Laura. This one's coming from your ex right now. How do you deal with being called anti-psychiatry and anti-medication when you try to raise awareness about the medications and informed consent?
Good question. And I get that all the time. You know, I think I just do my best to reframe that accusation and say that really this is about informed choice. It's not about these drugs inherently being good or bad. It's about having a straightforward, common sense understanding of what they are and what they're not, and then from there making your own personal choice accordingly. You know, who am I to say that no one should ever take these drugs? I would never be so presumptuous as to think I know what someone else needs. But if someone's believing that they need their so-called medication because they have a so-called chemical imbalance, then they're not actually making a true choice there. They're being coerced. They're being misled and basically tricked into thinking they're choosing something that they're not. And so that's what I would challenge. And then once they have a more straightforward understanding of these drugs, if they still want to take them, God bless them. I mean, where I will say I am firmly against is forcibly drugging people. I am against that. I can stand strongly in that because I believe in the integrity of every human being's body. But if someone has good information, they're informed of the risks, they understand the evidence base upon which these drugs are approved, from there, whatever choice they want to make, I respect.
Yeah. Well, something that bothers me is that that there is a lot of nuance to using these the psychiatric medications, and I find that whenever someone expresses a belief that isn't, like, frankly just cheerleading someone onto these medications, like if you bring up the fact that the drugs aren't studied any longer than a year, or that the withdrawal it can be really challenging, and that the drugs wear off, like just common sense things about the medications, they will come at you and just saying you are stigmatizing you're stigmatizing
pill
people.
Shamer.
You're pill shaming people. You're trying to say that they're weak for needing to be on the medications, and that's not what's happening. I mean, this is just informed consent, and so it seems these criticisms about being stigmatizing and anti-medication, they're really there to sort of shut down any alternative perspective that isn't just the meds are great, and as a moral imperative we should be only saying positive things about this, such that lots of people get on these medications, which we we just accept to be helpful when they're really not.
Yep.
For a lot of people, and there needs to be a lot of nuance in how and when and how long you're going to use them for, which people aren't really warned about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's go back over to YouTube and have a look at some of these ones. Christina says, "Hi, I'm on Seroquel for sleep, and it's making me gain so much weight that I can't lose." Yeah, that's a really big problem, Christina. Drugs like Seroquel and olanzapine, I've seen people gain, 50 pounds.
My weight fluctuated 70 pounds
Yeah.
on antipsychotics.
And then the problem with these drugs is they actually change your basal metabolic rate, which is the rate at which your cells just burn calories in the background. So people will try and exercise, they will try to diet on these when they're taking the medications, and they still won't lose weight. And it's not because they're not trying hard enough. It's simply because their metabolism has changed on the drug. So the weight that you gain on medications can be really hard to lose, and sometimes people even will have a hard time losing weight even after they come off, for quite some time, until their metabolism returns to normal. So I'm sorry that's going on.
Yeah, but stay patient. Like Josef said, for me, my metabolism took about 3 years really to figure itself out after I was off. I happened, maybe that's on the longer end of the spectrum, I'm not sure, but it did eventually my weight just, the weight I'd gained fell off without me even trying. It just took time. So stay patient, stay full of hope that it's possible, and just in the meantime, whatever practices you can develop to help you reconnect with the messages your body is telling you, that was kind of my guiding principle as I came off and once I was off. How do I actually get back in touch with all the different messages that my body is giving me, from hunger and satiation to tiredness, to overstimulation, to sickness? I think the more you can focus on that and just trust that the metabolic issues will resolve themselves in time, the more it kind of empowered and in the driver's seat of your life you'll feel.
Yeah. And there was another question there. Someone asked, what do you see as the future for anti-psychiatry? I guess that's what we are. Anti-psychiatry. Where are we going with this anti-psychiatry or critical psychiatry movement? What do you think? What's going to become of this?
Yeah, well, to get back to the earlier question, like if by anti-psychiatry you mean this movement of people who believe the time has come to step back and rethink the current mental health industry, I feel more optimistic than I've ever felt in the 15 years that I've been doing this work, that we are reaching a cultural tipping point at which the mental health industry has pushed itself so far. The rates of people on these drugs and diagnosed are so high that it's not sustainable, and I think we're pretty close to our culture kind of waking up from this spell, you could say, this spellbinding that we've been in now for decades, and to say, like, this isn't working. People are more unhappy than ever before. People are sicker than ever before, and physically, it's time for something different. And I really feel that coming. How do you feel about that, about your optimism?
I don't know. Yeah, I think we're, if you're in the United States right now, we've got something really amazing happening with Bobby Kennedy being the head of HHS and the whole MAHA movement going on, which is, really is a coalition of different people who are really upset with doctors, whether it's the people who are upset with how COVID was handled, or the people who have been upset with what's happening to the food in the United States and the processed foods, or people who are upset about pollution. It's kind of a broad coalition of people who say, hey, the leaders who we trusted to look after us, they're really not doing a great job, and people are getting hurt because of it. And so there's a lot of traction right now in reforming these groups, and the truth is, I think things. I think this might be a moment in time, unless it kind of continues after this. I think a lot of the progress and the media attention that these issues are getting could die away, because eventually, if kind of political interest goes, it's just going to be the pharmaceutical industry and commercial interests which will kind of control the narrative again, because they'll have all the resources to simply push that version of the drugs are safe, they're always safe, do not question it. I do think there's something interesting happening in psychiatry right now with psychedelics, which probably sounds like totally out there, like how could psychedelics make a big difference to this? But it can, because the way that the psychedelic meds are being introduced in this country is they're packaged with therapy. It's like you do some therapy sessions, you take a psychedelic, you have some transformative experience where you rethink things in your life, and then you see a therapist afterwards. Rather than it being like, here's a drug that fixes a chemical imbalance, it's very much like, here is a drug that helps you kind of grow as a person. Now, you might not agree with that or support that, but the thing is, if psychedelics come onto the market in the US, there will be a war chest of marketing resources from these companies who are going to want to control the narrative. They're going to want to come forward and say, listen, these medications, they're just masking problems. Come and use our new psychedelic, because this is what's really going to help you kind of grow. And so if that happens, I do think we will still kind of maintain control of the narrative that we need to be a lot more careful with these medications and how they're used. But I think it comes down to like money, money, political will, and all of that. We're at a great time right now, but I don't know if it's going to continue. Yeah. Okay.
Some great comments.
Yeah. Psychiatric drugs saved my life. What kind of doctor would recommend against seeking medical treatment? Yeah. Maybe I'll go with this
Please.
one. Yeah. This is absolutely true. Psychiatric medications, for some people they can be life-saving, but for other people they could be one of the worst decisions that they ever made. And that's just simply part of the complexity of taking drugs for your mental health. You can look at this in various ways. There's the side of things where some people just genetically will have different responses to them. Many people get on SSRIs and they'll just have a really great response to that. They'll find it helpful. They won't have a lot of problems coming off, and they could experience that as life-saving. But then you have to realize there's a whole camp of people who will get on these medications. They wear off really quickly. The doctor just maxes them out on the dose. They slowly start to make them feel worse. The doctors misdiagnose it. And then when they try to come off, their entire life falls apart. Both of those things can be true. The other thing that's really interesting about how varied the perspectives on the medications are is that people will say different things depending on when you talk to them, right? Someone who's just started an SSRI for the first time, and it's been like the first 18 months and the drug effect is still working and they haven't built up a lot of tolerance, they're going to say one thing that can be very different to the person who's been on them for 5 to 10 years, when their body has built up tolerance and the effect is worn off, and they start to say, I don't even think this drug is doing anything anymore. And so it's a really complicated issue. Generally, where I stand on it is, I think you should avoid the drugs at all cost, because I see them being kind of like a ticking time bomb in the long term, where you don't know if it's going to wear off and you're just going to be stuck with this med that you're adapted to and you need more and more and more. You don't know that. But at the same time, if you're someone who has done all of the non-drug interventions and you're still suffering a lot, I think you would be a fool to not look at everything on the table. And if the drugs help you function, then you just accept the risks and use them. So it's just complicated.
Yeah, and I think for me, in retrospect, I see that those stories of, this med saved my life, or being in the hospital saved my life, those were things that I once believed for myself as well, and were actually, I could argue, true for me. But I see now that in large part those beliefs were true because of the stories that I had come to believe about myself. So what I mean by that is, once I became really invested in this idea that I was bipolar and that I had this, disease in my brain, and these drugs were treatments for that disease. And, just like someone with diabetes needs insulin, yada, yada, yada. Once I believed deeply in that and believed deeply in this idea that because I was bipolar, that meant that my life was going to look like a series of, episodes where I was up and hypomanic or manic, and then I would collapse into depression and suicidal despair. I believed that so deeply that actually almost became, in many ways, a self-fulfilling prophecy, where I did live for years in this way that totally looked bipolar. And I did end up needing to check myself into psych wards because I was convinced I would kill myself. And I did take all these meds for all these years, thinking like, thank God I'm on these meds, because if it's this bad on them, how much worse would it be if I wasn't on them? Now in retrospect, I see that the drugs for me weren't actually saving my life in a literal sense of the word. But what were I believing? Were I making sense of my experiences differently and not seeing myself as sick with a lifelong illness? I don't necessarily think I would have reached the conclusion that meds were saving me, because I wouldn't have been viewing myself as in need of this life-saving treatment. So I think a lot of it comes down to the stories that you're telling yourself about what your pain means, about what your experiences mean, about what you need and don't need, and that's a beautiful thing, because you can always rewrite the story you're telling yourself about your struggles. And that's not me saying that these drugs can't have profoundly helpful effects. I've seen it firsthand in many friends, but it's a nuanced thing, and I do think we can get polarized, and they're life-saving or they're life-destroying, and it is nuanced, and it is about the meaning that we make of them and the meaning that we make of our own suffering, and we don't have enough space in our culture, I think, to have that more nuanced conversation because of how polarized it is, the conversation about these drugs is right now.
And so for the people that haven't read your book, Laura, like, what did you really need? If not the medications, what was the treatment that you needed to be well?
Well, it was in part realizing that it wasn't treatment that I needed, because I wasn't actually sick. That was, I think, the big shift for me was when I began to actually educate myself about the drugs I was on, about the diagnoses that I had, and I realized that these were all stories that I had been taught to believe about myself that were actually far more fictional than factual.
But you were having real suffering. I mean, you like you had mentioned, you had been cutting, and everything kind of came to a head, and there was a lot of genuine struggle going on in your life.
And I'm so glad you point that out, because I think a lot of people hear when we challenge the idea of mental illness as this, pathology in the brain, people assume that we're challenging the reality of suffering. And it's actually quite the opposite. I just tweeted about that the other day. To me, I spent so many years reducing my struggles, which were profound. I mean, if you haven't read my book, it's called Unshrunk. I would love for you to read it and tell me what you think. But as you'll find in that book, I was completely disabled, dysfunctional, unable to take care of myself. I couldn't work. I had no friends. I was dependent on my family. I was a mess. It was real. But when I realized all of this wasn't happening because there was something wrong with my brain, that opened up endless possibilities for both what my struggles meant, if not symptoms of mental illness, and then what I needed to do about it. And to answer your question, I think the most important thing for me was actually, getting off of these drugs and healing from them, healing from the injuries that these drugs had caused my brain and body, which took years because I was on them for so long. I was on so many of them. I didn't come off safely or slowly in the way that you help people come off in your practice. I help people come off in the work I do. I didn't have any of that. So it was brutal. But besides healing from pharmaceutical trauma, I think the next most important thing was this meaning-making thing that I'm talking about here, how I was actually understanding what my experiences meant. Nutrition was also huge, and I realized I've spent all these years totally disconnected from my body, not connected from the drugs. So diet was huge, removing processed foods as much as possible, removing inflammatory foods, eating as much as I can eat in, you know, the way our caveman ancestors ate. That was huge. And then I think the last most helpful thing was just finding meaning and purpose in my life, and learning how to get out of myself and be there for other people, and seeing that everything I'd been through actually had value. And for anyone here watching, if you're in the thick of pain, whether it's because you believe in your diagnosis deeply or because you're healing from psych drugs, whatever the source of your pain, there's so much meaning in it. And your pain is perhaps the most kind of valuable medicine for someone else. And I think realizing that was huge for me, because I spent all these years as a professional psych patient just thinking my pain was just these meaningless symptoms.
And you have, for those of you who don't know Laura's business, it's called Inner Compass, and I
That's
really,
a nonprofit.
oh, so it's the nonprofit, but I really like the name Inner Compass. I mean, is that about like pain being a compass, or is that about like where does that come from? Because I like the symbolism of that.
Yeah, it comes from this realization I had that what the mental health industry taught me to do was to distrust myself. They taught me that I couldn't trust my mind, I couldn't trust my emotions because I was sick, and these were all pathologies. So I grew up basically disconnected from any sense of intuition, instinct, common sense. I had and pills and psych wards and programs, these things outside of me to steer me through my life. And when I realized that getting off psych drugs is really just the beginning, because then it's about actually coming back into contact with that inner compass within you, with this wisdom that is guiding you through your life if you make space to hear it and you learn how to listen to it. And so I wanted to name the nonprofit Inner Compass Initiative for that reason. And just for anyone not familiar with it, we provide all kinds of free information, resources. We have a community called The Exchange, where people from all over the world are supporting one another and having discussion calls, taper support calls, sharing their stories, sharing their struggles and their triumphs. And it all came out of this idea of kind of taking back your agency and claiming your own expertise through living.
Now, I want to, because I know you've worked with a lot of patients coming off medications. When you pull away the drugs, I generally tend to see three different things. I see, like what you have mentioned a lot, when people come off, they start to be more aware of food and how the things that they put in their body affect them. The other thing is like purpose. They start to say, my life has no purpose. Like, what am I here for? What am I meant to be doing? And then relationships become important. To me, like, sometimes mental health can be simple, and I think these aren't simple things to figure out, like finding purpose, community and relationships and health. But I think they're simple to understand, but they're complicated things to figure out. I mean, that's what I'm finding with patients, and that's where I'm finding that the injuries are and the things that are making people unhappy. I mean, do you have any, like, what are you finding?
I think those three themes I definitely see a lot too, and were true in my own experience. The one I'd add on is, for those of us who were psychiatrized as children, a lot of maybe the fourth common theme is that we basically have to learn the basics of being an adult in the world, because we grew up believing we were defective, outsourcing our authority to doctors and pills. Often this meant we were also dependent on our families to take care of us. And so for a lot of us who emerged on the other side of that as adults, we realized, like, holy shit, I don't even know how to be an adult. I don't know how to, the basics of communication. Like, how do I have a difficult conversation with someone? Yes. How do I pay my bills? There's just so many basic skills that a lot of people might just not even realize are skills, because it's what you learn through your teens and your 20s. But when you're a psych patient and that's your main purpose in life in those years, as it was for me, and I know a lot of others, you then have to kind of catch up on a lot of those basic skills, which can bring shame and all kinds of emotions when you realize like, gosh, I'm a little behind on the game here, like being an adult. But when you just embrace it and kind of like get self-deprecating about it, and you realize how far from alone you are with it, then it actually becomes this really wonderful, meaningful process of learning how to be an adult in the world, whether you're 25 or 35 or 45.
Well, that's the sad thing, because some of these deficits can be the reasons that people become unhappy. I mean, the one that comes to mind for me is the inability to stand up for yourself and to believe in yourself. Because you end up, your parent tells you to go and do a field of study that you're not really interested in, and instead of sticking up for yourself and saying, oh well, I'm not really interested in that, you go and do it. Or you end up staying in a relationship that's really not a great relationship because you're afraid of like having a difficult conversation and sticking up for yourself, so you end up like settling and all of these things. And our mental health systems, we don't really talk to people at this kind of high resolution where we can figure out what exactly are those deficits and how can we support people. We just say, oh, you're unhappy, you have a brain illness, and then we mask it, and then 20 years later when the drugs poop out and you need to come off, all of the problems are waiting for you. Still.
Yep. And this all comes back to the inner compass for me, because everything you're describing, that's what you need to be in touch with to break up with that person you shouldn't be with, to stand up for yourself. It's when you're trusting in your own capacity to be a full agent in your life. And so I think it's
Okay. Well, Laura, we've been going on for about 45 minutes, so I think we could wrap now. But
we should do this again sometime.
We
do you all think we should do this again sometime?
Yeah.
Give us a yeah, let's do this again soon, Josef. I feel like we could go on for a long time, barely even scratching the surface. It's so good to see you all, and I apologize to the folks who've been commenting on my ex. I don't know how to see your comments, and I'm really sorry.
There are
Next
a lot
time
of
I'll figure it out.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, good to see you all.
Thanks
See you
everyone
soon.
for tuning in.
Bye.